Σας καλωσορίζω στην πρώτη διάλεξη για φέτος, ή όχι? Σε μια ωραία διάλεξη ακόμα για φέτος. Ευχαριστώ που ήρθατε. Απόψε έχουμε την χαρά να έχουμε μαζί μας την καθηγήτρια Evguenia Davidova στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Portland, στο στην δυτική ακτή των Ηνωμένων. Είναι στο τμήμα διεθνών και παγκόσμιων σπουδών του Πανεπιστημίου. Η Davidova, τα πραγματικά ενδιαφέροντα αφορούν την ύστερη Οθωμανική και τη μετα-Οθωμανική περίοδο στα Βαλκάνια και ειδικότερα θέματα όπως το εμπόριο, την υγεία και πρόνοια, την ανάδυση του εθνικισμού, θέματα φύλου. Είναι συγγραφέας ενός βιβλίου πρόσφατα με τίτλο Balkan Transition to Modern National States Through the Eyes of Three Generations of Merchants. Και εξάρτητα το περίοδο του 1980 μέχρι τα τέλη του 19ου αιώνα. Και έχει δημιουργηθεί επίσης ένα τόμο για τον πλούτο στα Οθωμανικά και μετα-Οθωμανικά Βαλκάνια. Σήμερα θα μας μιλήσει το θέμα που βλέπετε για τις εμπορικές στρατηγικές για την επέκταση της επιχειρήσεων στα κεντρικά Βαλκάνια του 19ου αιώνα. Δεν θα μιλήσω άλλο, ευχαριστούμε την Davidova και θα ακούσουμε με χαρά.
Good evening and thank you very much for having me. So the topic is, I have chosen this picture just because I will talk about generations of merchants, and just as you can see very vividly the differences, and I will start with my talk, and we'll start with one quote. Thus, our Poligorigi are Poligorov amongst the Bulgarian, Poligora amongst the Romanians, and amongst the Greeks, Poligoros. And the quote is an eloquent example of the name choices employed by traders to navigate various ethnic social contexts. Similar examples can be listed, let's say the Sakharchivsky brothers became Sakharchioglu or Sakharchiova, and many other names were changed. So why did they employ such a name multiplicity? What other tactics did they apply, and how did economic behavior impact national preferences? In order to approach these issues, I will use a case study, and the case study is a family company established in Kalofer, a small mountainous village in the 1800s. The firm offers a case study that illustrates strategies for business expansion which ensured rare longevity of 3 generations until 1893. The company's economic and social history encapsulates a wealth of significant socioeconomic and political changes in the 19th century Balkans. It shows that the quote, merchant class, unquote, term used by Trajan Stojanovic, classical work on the merchants from 1960, was not a homogeneous body, but rather consisted of various ethnic, religious, linguistic, and social groups that competed and collaborated with each other and with their European counterparts. The Pchileshtov's family engaged in a plethora of activities which presents a success story of a sort. In order to capture features of such multitude, I have adopted a generational and network analysis for reconstructing the company's profile of continuity and change. I will move now to some of the challenges when you work with commercial archives, and so one was that there are manuscript sources in various languages, scarce and incomplete information, hiding information from the ledgers, and I'll show you some of the nominal value of the capitals that is not so clear. Difficulty with creating data and its measurability and comparability. I will also talk a little bit briefly about the sources that I have used, and this is business correspondence, and this Tepchilashtu family archive consists of 28,000 units, and it's one of the richest Bulgarian archives that covers the whole 19th century. Until maybe 20 years ago, it was used mostly from nationalist perspective to show the Bulgarians' participation in the movement for independent church, and so that was even the argument when the archive was bought by the National Library. It is extremely rich for social history from any point of view. Of course, I haven't read all of those units, but it is probably one of the richest documentations of the 19th century. So I have used legal documents, commercial guides, memoirs, newspapers, travel accounts, and consular reports. And here is one visual representation on this corner, your left corner. You see Berat for Avrupa Tujars. There is a Turkish, Bulgarian, and Bulgarian-Greek epistolary manuals. Dunav, which was bilingual newspaper, and at the front you see an account. That is one of the few cases I chose that because it is an account of Mrs. Luxa Sahachiu. And women in businesses are not so visible, so just to see. Some of the questions that I have been working with and thinking about was one is referring to the type of strategies, as my presentation today is focused, of each generation, and which of those strategies were successful, were they transmitted to the next generation. Another question is the role of various ethnic and religious networks as constructed by traders' social interactions. Another question was about the impact of business prosperity on political and social behavior. And another question that I have been thinking was what was the role of women in business. I will move on the argument, and my main idea is that it was exactly, I would suggest that it was exactly the Ottoman institutional context of an empire in the process of integration into world economy and of building of modern military and bureaucratic and financial structures, namely the Tanzimat, that nurtured the success of such long-term companies which disappeared within the post-Ottoman national realm. Such longevity was stimulated by practicing, this is a term that I have borrowed and changed from Sanjay Subramanian and Bailey, who have an article about Indian portfolio capitalists and their participation in multi-ethnic economic and political networks. So I have transformed the term into practicing a portfolio of occupations. And the other argument is based on combination of generational and network analysis. Here I have based my ideas on Karl Mannheim essay on generations and the essence of what I have used of his research is the identity of belonging to the same group of people that actually experience the same political, economic, cultural, and social changes. And Brodel's ideas of network and generational analysis was more focused on minority merchants. Philip Curtin was focused on diaspora. So what I found also another interesting idea that I have used in my research is by Mark Granovetter from sociology, who's written an article about weak ties, which created kind of, he looks at different groups of immigrants particularly, and he calls weak ties the places within different networks that are intersecting among varying groups. So the people who are at the groups and peoples at these intersection nodes were actually had more opportunity for mobility, any kind of mobility. So by using ideas from all these authors, I will move on into talking about this, how I have conceptualized the three generations. In addition, when we talk about commerce, usually what comes to mind was the predominant family business model. And again, Brodel is one of the pioneers of elaborating on these issues. By using the concept of portfolio of occupations, I basically disagree with Trajan Stojanovich's essay, which is still considered the classical text, because he's using a five-stage approach, namely eyesight, Carter, commission or forwarding agent, independent merchant, money lender, and finally banker and parfait négociant. End of quote. Instead of this linear progression, I seek for manifestation of simultaneous activities and various occupations. So the many Greek scholars, and you see a lot of names in the second bullet point, use the model of business coalitions, which overlaps to some extent with the network approach. And what I have found fruitful is also produce ideas of social capital, all the cultural, social, and symbolic that are based on the economic and transforming into one another, but at the same time the economic reinforcing also the economic capital. And the last kind of theoretical concept is about the reputation mechanism. And I have used here the ideas of Avner Grief, who has conceptualized the idea of past and present behavior, how past and present behavior predetermines future profits, and the pressure that was exercised over individual merchants as part of a broader network. I also have read a very interesting article by Stanan and Nadic, who explored the link between the market mechanism, which is the firm, to how it is linked to a non-market institution, which is the family, and the latter usually is charged with moral elements, and the pressure acquires some kind of moral components. Some of the strategies, this is like an overview. I will not address all of them today, but just to give you a sense of kin and family solidarity, marriage, wife's involvement, specialized education. They're just in reverse order, not in order of importance. Business diversification, professional espionage, connections with the Ottoman administration, and flexibility and shifting business practices. Now I will move to the first generation. The information is sparse. So the founder is Petko Stoyanov. You can see the years of his life. So what is interesting about this is not him. This is just, I found it's my small joke, since there is so little information. This is because I'm talking about the to see the fabric by Gaitan. That's an example of fabric. So I have all the other images are not fake, but this one is, yeah. So he owned a dükkan and tavern in Kalofer, whose hinterland specialized in animal husbandry and related products. So that's interesting, the combination. What I want to present here is the combination. So this is more service-oriented business that allowed him to build local networks, which is combined after that with production and trade of abba and shayak. And in a way, this created another network local because he invested from the dükkan and the shop into putting out system. And this putting out system involved most rural women in the neighboring villages that were producing also abba by getting their different forms of putting out system. So, apart from the first dükkan and tavern being more sedentary type of occupation, he was engaged also in, he was leading an itinerary lifestyle, but also participating in the local putting out system. And he realized some of this production by trading into Asia Minor, mostly in Izmit where he died, and Bursa, and most of the customers and partners there were Muslim names, and some of them are Armenian names of what I have identified. So it's not clear about initial accumulation, probably it is related to Kırgızistan's time. There are some other evidence of cooperation with some local ayams into this putting out system. But he's an example of merchant who was trading locally into local markets and long distance markets. Most 18th century Balkan merchants were involved either in the Habsburg Empire, Russia, or the Danubian principalities. So this is an example of reorienting the trade at the beginning of 19th century to Ottoman inter-regional trade, and he provides this example of linking Anatolia and Rumelia, a strategy that the next generation will continue and expand also. Some of the business characteristics that I already mentioned is a combination of at least two concurrent activities, any mix of craft trade, usury, and putting out production, multi-ethnic cooperation, at least outside of the Balkans, high mobility, high physical mobility, and wife's involvement in business. Here, this is the generation of the mothers. Again, the information about this person is not so. So she married in 1800. What is unusual about her is first that she traveled to Izmit when the husband died and collected some of the debts. The father left her with 3 sons and around 18,000 grosz. What she did was she gave to the 3 sons at the time half of the sum, and the other half she was using for lending money at interest, and at that time the interest varied between 8 and 20%. And her participation in the business more or less fits into the model of wives as a bridge between fathers and sons in property transfer, which is a concept that was developed by Galina Ulianova, about 19th century Russian women in business. I will move now to the second generation. So there are 3 sons, as you can see the pictures and the dates of birth. The business activity of this generation is the most well documented, and I have divided it into decades just to give you a brief overview. So 1920s, under the guidance of their mother, they continued the same type of economic activities, production and trade in abba and local and long distance trade. What is important in this period is 1826, the disbanding of Janissaries, and In 1830s, they still kept local business, but also moved to Constantinople. And for this period, it is known that they achieved the status of a Vrba Tuđelar. And what I consider also important factor is the Greek War of Independence that allowed for a vacuum for a while, for economic vacuum, which was filled partly by Jewish, Armenian and Bulgarian entrepreneurs. So that could explain, because I'll show you after that, capital accumulation, just what was happening in the 30s. In 1840s, they refocused the trade also in local agricultural products such as grain, hides, wax, and tallow. And the total capital in 1849 reached from 18,000, to give you a sense, to more than 500,000 gurush. That's probably due to the trade in grain and abolition of trade monopolies over the export of grain of 1838, and the move, of course, to Constantinople. In 1852, the two survived brothers separated, and each one had a substantial capital of 400-something gurush, and each earned a profit of 100,000 gurush. All companies' assets and liabilities were assigned to Hristo Trčevaš, who was the older surviving brother. What I want to mention also that I have made a map of all the contacts and correspondence. And in ethnic term, the picture looks as you can see: 53% Bulgarians, 17% Muslims, 15 Greeks, 5 Armenians, 5 Jews, and 5 foreign and unidentified. Of course, this is a representation of traffic of multiple different traffics of goods and people and services. It sometimes depends on the location, and even the percentage, let's say, of Greek merchants and entrepreneurs was much smaller. In some occasions was much more important than the 53 the others. So it depends on the location also, it's not just this quantitative. There were novel elements in the business of the second generation, combination of tax farming, state delivery, in tandem with banking, export trade, and participation in different entrepreneurial, multi-ethnic entrepreneurial networks. I want to show you the table with the capitals until 1877. So, as I mentioned, in 1851, the two brothers separated, and you have, again, these are nominal numbers. It's not clear what is in that, what is invested, and so on, because they were hiding in the. So it's more kind of representation of to see how different activities impacted the business, the accumulation of capital. As you can see, between 1851 and 58, there is a huge jump. And partly it could be explained by the Crimean War and participation in deliveries for the Crimean War. Partly it is due to the early Tanzimat reforms that created a layer of local non-Muslim entrepreneurs, group administrations, and the second edict of 1856. And you can see what I will talk about is the halcyon years of the company are 1860s and 1870s, which I will give you a few examples that would explain this kind of maintenance of huge capitals. So my first example is of tax farming, sheep, big tax. I have worked with many different. Some of you probably know that the tax farming starts usually with auctions. In 19th century they are different, it's changing, but so you have local auction and you have auction in Istanbul, it was changing. So usually a seraph should deposit a lump sum for revenue unit. There should be also a kefil or surety, and Tapçılaştuf, in some of the cases, Tapçılaştuf company participated in all these layers. So paid for in both in Romania and Anatolia. This is just to give an example why in the 70s you have such an increase of the capitals. If you look back in 1870 we have 12,000, because just for some of the businesses we are talking about huge amount of money. So he participated also, the company, as a participant, sometimes as a manager, and so in addition, so there is also a lot of interest of various smaller entrepreneurs locally that created different coalitions of tax farmers and subcontractors, because this allows for trickling down the profits via subcontracting or selling of different hisses. Sometimes whole villages, the whole village will buy a hisse, sometimes are different entrepreneurs, locals, and so what I have seen is a cooperation of Muslims, Jewish, Armenian, local entrepreneurs, and Christians. I would say it's not only Bulgarian, sometimes there are Greek names or Hellenized Christians, and so I have identified different tax farming, and so there were competing coalitions locally. I have worked also with the archive of a Jewish family, Arye, in Samokov, and that gave me a very interesting perspective, because the Tapçılaştuf archives gave me an idea about auctions in the capital, and I have seen the Arye family for local auctions and different local coalitions, and there various, so the same people participated with different participants for Yeshur, for the tax of sheep, of pig, and different types. So there are very fluid different coalitions locally. They knew for the existence of one another, and we're trying to get also collaboration in the Ottoman capital when you have different coalitions also, again, of bankers from different ethnic origin. So what is important about is that also some of this is exported through Greek diaspora coalitions and in insurance companies to London and Marseille. So you have also a portfolio of tax collections, and as Murat Cizakça has done in his research on tax farming, it's more aimed at risk aversion rather than capital pooling. My other example is that again explains this huge accumulation of capital is the state delivery to the palace and arsenal. One is just meat delivery, and from the area from north of Danube, where the meat was bought, where the sheep was bought, and also again the profit is like 10%. And the three main contractors are, again, I wanted to show you this, the multi-ethnic Dimitrakopoulos, and Artinov was an Armenian entrepreneur. And the other son was monitoring the delivery. Of course, there are other factors, non-economic and social factors, that also contributed to accumulation of such capital, connection with high and medium Ottoman officials locally as well as in the capital. Here I'm mentioning the recent PhD of a Bulgarian student about commercial courts in 19th century. Very good, very well documented dissertation. And I have seen the cultivation of various local and central administration connections, like the Grand Vizier Ali Pasha was among the debtors for years. So he never returned his debts to the company. Other factor is how the What I also want to mention for the next generation of women in business is quite different here, the generation of wives. It was reduced to mostly lending money, and participation in business was non-participation was due to shifts within the different business practices, such as sedentarization, expansion of tax farming and state deliveries, institutionalization of finance, and complicated accounting and management, and of course the direct inclusion of sons in this case. Now I will move to the last third generation, which actually transitioned from commerce to bureaucracy. We have the eldest son, who had managerial function in the company, and he was the person with the highest physical mobility. He had the lower level of education in comparison to the other two sons. He attended the Greek commercial school on the island of Halkis. The second one attended first the French college in Constantinople, and after that studied at Lycée Impérial in Marseille. And particularly he was very much connected to branch of the Petrokokkinos family. He was responsible for bookkeeping and coordinating functions, so he had more sedentary tasks within the company. The third son studied first at Robert College, and after that he went and studied at the commercial school in London. He performed originally minor tasks, but he was mostly involved in negotiating with railroad administration, with shipping charges. He was more involved exactly in businesses with Europe. So we see intentional strategy of some specializations in terms of languages, countries, and functions within the company, which is very unusual. That's why I said it's sort of success, because other companies could not afford that. And at the same time, the daughters in the family did not attend any school. Some of them studied with private tutors. So how the activities continued and changed. So on the one hand, the sons kept some of the old commercial contacts, but they also established some new contacts, especially in Russia. And I know that Jelena had this huge project about Black Sea. So we have seen some of the same companies actually that the brothers continue to maintain. There is a change of the list of commodities. The commodities that the father's generation imported, they started to export, and vice versa. So not tax farming and the concomitant surety, saraf, and state delivery. Instead, a new business was created collecting the outstanding debts. And on the table, I show you that even after 75, there was an increase of the capitals. It's kind of leftovers from their fathers, because after that the sons never reach into the millions of the capital of the firm. So in 1893, the company moved to Bulgaria and joined the swelling state bureaucracy. What happened is between these 1870s, 1890s is, of course, there were macroeconomic and political factors that decreased and changed the profile, business profile of the company, namely the 1873 financial crisis, all the Balkan wars from 1870s, and also most importantly, the establishment of the public debt administration in 1881. So basically the company turned into a conventional medium-sized commercial firm dealing with import and export and trade on commission, and were not successful, so they moved in 1890s to the newly established Bulgarian Principality. What I also want to mention here is that the traditional historiographical thesis still maintained by some researchers is that merchants had supported national revolutions. So what my view from this from the perspective of the Tepchileshtov's company and all their contacts is that we can talk more about the form of economic Ottomanism through tax farming, and which in a way incorporated a lot of non-Muslim entrepreneurs through these networks, multi-ethnic networks that Tepchileshtov's family, as I mentioned, was very active in their support for Bulgarian independent church, but were lacking enthusiasm for support for revolutionary Bulgarian aspirations and any other forms of Bulgarian nationalism. And I think Ariel Salzman talks about this kind of incorporation through economy of local administrative and other businessmen early in 18th century in Anatolia. So this is more an example of similar kind of incorporation of certain entrepreneurs, non-Muslim entrepreneurs. I will finish my presentation with a few conclusions. So what I found interesting from the sources is that the company longevity is due partly to parallel and diverse economic and financial activity on both low and high levels. And by that I mean that on the one hand in the 60s we have this participation in multi-ethnic tax farming and so on, and at the same time I have seen in their registers still the same time of commerce that the first generation their father established with similar Muslim names in Anatolia with trade in Abba. So it simultaneously, none of the previous businesses disappeared, they just simultaneously practiced all of them. So there is, that's what I would call continuity of older and use of new business practices which allowed for certain flexibilities. The multi-ethnic cooperation and competition was also supporting this kind of maintaining the longevity of the firm. And what I would also suggest is that there was a transfer of Ottoman business skills into post-Ottoman administrative structures. So it is the third generation, the sons who turn from professional boundary crossers, which is one of the definitions given by Homer about merchants, into bureaucratic boundary setters. But that's kind of the transition of the third generation and escaping in a way from business, from the business profile of the company is not the only Balkan phenomenon. It's a typical European phenomenon. In Britain, most of the third generation moved into finance and they stopped some of the investment practices. In other countries, they just moved, like this case and many other entrepreneurs, Balkan Ottoman entrepreneurs, into the field of administration. So, yeah, thank you. It is in the Balkan mountains. It is in the area of the bigger area of Philippopolis or Plovdiv.
So it was outside the borders of Bulgaria with the Berlin Treaty, and that's how they moved.
It is in the middle of what is today Bulgaria, where is the Balkan mountain, and yeah, they moved to Constantinople.
So Constantinople was the center, not Delphi.
I'm sorry.
Up to 1893, the center was Constantinople, not
Yeah. They had still a branch, but the main activity was controlled by Constantinople, the center. Yeah. There is a lot of research contemporary colleagues from Turkey do about about migration to Istanbul, and actually it is an exorbitant amount of Bajur moving to Constantinople in 1830s. So the case of the Tepçileshtov's father and the Tepçileshtov fits into the broader movement of a lot of producers of Bajur into the capital.
Thank you for your lecture. Some question for clarification. In the 20s, the first generation, what was trading in Asia Minor? Was it Abay Shayat or other stuff?
I'm sorry, I don't
Well, the first generation, they traded in Asia Minor with meat. So was trading on Abay Shayat?
Mostly about different types of Abba. Even in Russia, they also traded later in Russia, also with much finer. Abba was never abandoned.
So what I want to ask is the first generation mostly engaged in putting out and trading of Abay Shayat? Is he somehow more directing his activities to the industrial trade of the Bulgarian areas, or is he a more general trading? Does he have other articles that trades besides Abba and Shayat?
The long distance trade, what I have seen, and again there is not so much material about that early period, is long distances Abba and Shayat. Locally, probably with some others, I haven't seen. I know that about this, the tavern and the shop, which could be also Abba, and the putting out system is that created. I have no materials to say, let's say, in food or in other materials. It's possible that because the area was specialized in animal husbandry, that also participation with other animal products, but nothing else because the area does not produce anything else.
Was there a fourth generation?
I'm sorry?
Was there a fourth generation after the third? They go to Bulgaria. Do we know what happened with their son?
I have interviewed people, heirs to the family, when I was living in Bulgaria. Most of them after that became either civil servants or some of them like some intellectual professions, lawyers and so on. But none of them otherwise participated. They even sold for quite high price the whole archive to the Bulgarian state, to the National Archive. So they made money out of the archive.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this presentation. It's very close to what I'm interested in this day. So I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. First of all, concerning the first generation, and mainly before the abolition of the 1830, of the grain monopoly, were they using any intermediaries for basically transporting grain from Bulgaria to Istanbul or other places in Asia Minor, and who were those intermediaries? Were they Muslim? What kind of occupations they were in. And apart from that, I wanted to ask if these numbers that you showed us concerning the economic growth of their capital, if they're somehow influenced by the inflation of the time.
Oh yeah, of course. But you know, the Gurush itself is representation. So again, that's why it's kind of what I'm showing is just to see that there was a nominal increase, but of course there is an and Kaime and so on. So it's not clear how much is.
So it might have been much smaller than it actually
Yeah, it looks very impressive, but obviously it's much smaller. Definitely, yeah, there is no doubt about that. But I cannot calculate it how it is because it's not clear even what is the capital really and how much is returned, and that's why the sons could not even return because they also participated. I didn't want because I was probably longer than what I'm supposed to talk, and so there is this Havala or Havala, some of you, they participated also in this, which is paying, you receive money from, the transaction is one region, administrative area, administrative unit, but you can get the money in another. And so this was also outsourced, so there were different collectors of this, Havala or Havala, and in encyclopedia, I think in Bacalon's encyclopedia, it's written that this practice stopped in 18th century. Well, at least until 1870s, it was very active, and there was constantly people asking, can you give me to collect, which this is collection of part of the tax farming. And also when there was a state delivery, how it is used for export for Europe or for Russia in the 60s and 70s is because there were some quota and they used this for the state delivery, so they can add some more grain that was transported cheaply and they paid cheaper taxes or no taxes and exported it. Going back to the early period when you asked about the first generation, more active at that times were the different chains of fairs for the local trade. And yes, all the merchants from this generation participated in local fairs. There are 2-3 chains, they're seasonals, as you know, they travel from one to another. But the transportation was assumed by so-called Kiraji, and so some of the names are Slavic, some of the names are Muslim. I haven't found some materials of this kind of cooperation for locally. It's possible that it's used mixed use for different areas, that it's not just one person you hire from point A to point B at the capital, but probably for different distances are used different Kiragis. And in this case it's also probably multi-ethnic, but I haven't done this kind of research and came across names to be more specific. Was there anything else that I'm not answering?
No, thank you very much.
So, if I can ask one more question. Do we have any kind of information of having financial relations with European bankers, banks, or merchant bankers? That is, were they using, especially the second generation, money bought from European bankers? Do we have any kind of information if they have a specific partner, banking partner in Marseille or elsewhere?
Yeah, in Vienna. Most of the contacts are in Vienna, and also some other in London. But in Vienna was, I can't remember which one, some of the big banks. So it was a direct communication. In London was through Greek companies, and I guess some branches in Marseille, as I mentioned, kind of there are specific communication specific of the big branches of So yeah, of course, even I have come across some communication with the US, and yes, they cannot, and Russian banks as well. But it's only Vienna was direct communication with the bank. The others were mediated by other local merchants who live in those cities that the banks were used.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, if they were with Vienna, why did they send their sons to Marseille, London? Because actually, it seems that the youngers who went to Kharkiv, London, and Marseille to study, they did go to Vienna. Somehow it's...
I have no idea. Probably one explanation is that they were communicating because there is correspondence with the Greek diaspora. They had also branches in the capital, in the Ottoman capital. So the Otto Chileshtov knew somebody from the branch, and probably that's kind of using these informal contacts to. Because after that in the 80s, I didn't mention, but a lot of the old contacts and new contacts by the sons were through this communication that they had in London and Marseille. So in London, for instance, there is an attempt for opening a branch of Chileshtov's family, and it involved Surus Pasha, who was the Ottoman, I think, ambassador, or within the Ottoman embassy. So it's kind of, there is an attempt of using contacts that were already established in Constantinople to use other branches outside, because the company didn't have otherwise any contacts. It's kind of, it's not part of the coalitions like in Greek diaspora. You have coalitions of different families, family-based businesses and intermarriages. This is not the case. I think it's what was happening, as I mentioned. It is a constellation of 1830s after the creation of the independent Greek state and the elimination of the phanariots for a while until the new phanariots. So that was the economic vacuum that these two brothers were able to insert themselves.
I'm not sure if I understood something correctly, that's why I want to ask. At the end, you said that despite this theory of merchants supporting nationalistic uprising, if I understood correctly from your research, you didn't see that in this case. Is this correct?
That's what I. So what's your? Is this?
My question is, how did you end up to this conclusion? How did you see that this family was reluctant in
It's not just this family. I saw a lot of people who participated in those tax farming that they did not support financially or in any kind of direct statement. The revolutions, they were more what Bulgarian historiography called evolutionary development and gradual secession from the Ottoman state. So they supported actually more conservative newspapers financially that were more pro-Ottoman and pro-government. So that's kind of the way I interpreted it, is that they were more involved and had access not just to economic prosperity, but also a lot of, there were a whole layer of entrepreneurs and local and administrators who were part of the government, and so they were benefiting of the situation. not that everybody, but I just meant that there are a certain group of people that were not so enthusiastic of that.
If there is no other question, I will finish as I started with mine. Two questions. One is whether you see any change in commerce routes, not so much practices, because it has also to do with time, but commercial routes after the creation of the Bulgarian state. And the second is, why did they move? And not only from Constantinople, but also from trade as such. So what was the motive of the family to go back to Sofia and to a much less lucrative activity such as administration, instead of expanding their commercial activities?
I think that it's not less lucrative to be in the administration. They just couldn't, because the sons in a way were trained in Western Europe. Ideologically they adopted also the ideas of liberalism, so they did not have the contacts of the second generation in order to insert themselves into specific businesses that were more lucrative. They were medium-sized, very minor, competing also, if you could imagine, the Ottoman Empire in 1880s and 90s. There was more penetration of foreign capital, and so the competition was much more fierce. And also with the creation of the new nation states in the Balkans after the Russo-Ottoman War, it became more expensive. You have to pay all these taxes, national taxes. So first of all the markets became smaller, and second, more expensive. And so that's my understanding. And I have read that a lot of, especially Bulgarian families, it is considered that around 250 families moved back from the Ottoman domain to the nation state, even, or to Eastern Romania at that time in the 80s, which was, and also at that time the administration was just, there were no educated people, so it was a blooming field for everyone. One of the heirs to the family became personal advisor to the first king. Some of the others were involved at very high level of the government, and after that became these lawyers. And so I think that they landed into this kind of civil servant, free professions, kind of middle class bourgeoisie, in a way of what we, if we can call bourgeoisie the creation of these layers. So that's kind of what is considered. Plus, there was changes, more other changes in the late Ottoman Empire that were not so kind of welcoming the non-Muslim merchants. That's the explanation, that a lot of them moved. As to the, what was your second question about the trade routes? There is a change. First of all, there is an attempt of industrialization. There were a lot of concessions, railroad concessions in 1880s and 1890s in all the Balkans, and competition between the small states. So the new states started to invest so much more in their militarization than in commerce. So commerce itself changed, and what I've read in about late 19th century, not just in the Balkans, is the emergence of the professional managerial class that started to insert itself into all these the family business as such started to decrease in general because it became more profitable to hire managers. Also, the way the business was with financialization, much more complex financialization, it eliminated the possibility for small and medium-sized companies to trade. In terms of the most of what I've read is a regret for losing of the big Ottoman markets. Mostly trade was with Bulgaria particularly turned, but I think all the other countries into suppliers of some raw materials and also markets for other, which is not a new phenomenon, and market for some Western finished commodities. Russia was trying to insert itself in the 80s and 90s, but there are different scandals, like railroad scandals and so on. So, yeah, it changed in a way that all these connections to Asia Minor gradually disappeared because the mediators were mostly in the Ottoman territory, so when they moved back, even if they continued some economic activities, there were no mediators anymore.
Can I ask one last question? Concerning the wife of Stoyanov, so basically, as far as I understood, after he died, she started lending money. And I wondered how easy it was for a woman back then, and she was in Izmit, if I'm not mistaken, right? How easy was it for a woman back then to basically enter this business, to find the connections, even if she had inherited some of these connections from her husband? It still sounds as a complicated task. Have you done any research on this process?
Yeah, in most cases, women, I have done research about the whole area as far it's very little materials are available, so it's usually done through a male relative is done, or to other women, and women usually participated in lending money when they receive any heritage from parents or from brothers. So very often they lend to other women, but it's usually through a mediator. So it's still because the business, the way the business was conducted was still more simple. So more women participated even indirectly, and the second and third generation they were relegated only to renters of some property, mostly just because, first of all, the Ottoman commercial code was not allowing women directly to participate, but it's also the